Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our members of the public. Thank you for joining us this morning, to councillors, staff and the media. Here we are at the council meeting of Tuesday the 25th of August 2020. I'm sure you're aware that this is being live streamed, available for those that want to look at it later on YouTube. And I'd ask that phones are turned off or at least turned to silent for the duration of the meeting, please. Can I call for any apologies? I don't believe there are any. Thank you. Public forum. I'd just like to welcome Margaret. Please come and join us. Margaret's here to talk about waste and recycling, and as you know, Margaret, you have 10 minutes. Thank you for joining us this morning. One that suits you, and the mic should be, yes, indeed. Thank you, Margaret.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to Council about the issue, but the first point I want to make is that the staff of Tauranga City and Western Bay have worked tirelessly to bring forward a proposal that is clearly in everybody's interest within the sub-region. And it's been impressive, and I want to say as a ratepayer of your council that I'm paying over $300 a year for my present disposal, and if you implement it today, the price comes down to between $140 and $150 a year. I think it is really significant, and at the same time, you're getting rid of plastic bags. Now, the bins that will come with it you can take as long as you like to fill it. It has a green tag on it, and you can pull that off, and there is a cost for about $3 something to actually dispose of it. But for someone like myself, who hardly ever doesn't have a great deal of rubbish, then it's just I have to beg my neighbours to put stuff in to make it worthwhile. So, sir, there is a serious issue out there, and the reform of our rubbish system is fundamental to good life living within our sub-region. As well as that, the drum will hold 2.5 times the plastic bags that you can presently buy from the shops. And included in that is, in that 2.5 times, you don't have to put it out every week. You don't have to put it out only once a month if need be. And that certainly in my case, that's about the time I would be doing it. So the $3 something that I would pay is chicken feed and really good news. The food containers that we now have, I'm lucky I have a pig bucket, used to live at Ngā and my dear neighbours still pick my pig bucket up for me. But for everybody else, there is an opportunity to actually have a food container that you can actually put your scraps in and they'll be collected also. I think it's a recipe for success, and I'm just endorsing you to actually go ahead and do it. I note that Tauranga City has an interest in the worm farm at Kawerau, and presumably that's where you'll be putting a lot of the food scraps, but I'm not quite sure what Kelvin Hill has involved for that. But I don't want to take up any more of your time. You've got a long day ahead of you, but I am saying I am your ratepayer, and I am endorsing the fact that you've got a great policy to approve today, and I'll be heartily disappointed if anybody votes against it. Thank you, sir.
Kia ora, Margaret. Thank you very much for coming in, and we appreciate your impassioned speech. Are there any questions of Margaret? Councillor Baldock.
Morning, Margaret. Thank you for your message of support. Just wanted to clarify, because we've been quite careful about the numbers, where did you get the $150 figure from, please?
Came to us, it's there for your information. You can question Kelvin Hill about it when he comes later on. I think, Councillor Baldock, while I'm here, you actually represent me, I think, in the area where I live, but I never hear from any of our councillors, Mr. Mayor. Never.
That's noted, Margaret. Thanks. I'll talk to Councillor Baldock later on. Thanks very much.
I'll call you this afternoon.
Good. John Robson.
Questions, councillors, of Councillor Robson.
Appreciate we've got a somewhat broader span of councillors today. Margaret, an impassioned presentation, thank you. It seemed to me you were arguing, and I just want to clarify this, for pay-as-you-throw. A pay-as-you-throw option. You talked about $3.50 effectively per lift. That's the bit. That's the option you want to support.
That's for the one bin,
Yep.
The one bin that normally is picked up every week, as far as I'm concerned presently. And it's that bin is really quite crucial to the whole debate. But you've got glass, you've got food scraps, and now we've got recycling, and we've got this bin that you put your everyday stuff in, but not your food.
But I'm just clarifying, you're arguing for the option where when you put the bin out, you pay effectively $3.50 or whatever it is.
Absolutely.
That's the option you're in favour of?
Yes, very definitely.
Passionately. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? Thank you very much, Margaret. We appreciate you coming in today. Thanks, Margaret. Moving on, councillors, acceptance of late items. I don't believe there are any. Confidential business to be transferred into the open. I don't believe there is any. Change to the order of business. Note that we will be moving into the public excluded session after agenda item 10.4 and will resume back in open after the completion of the public excluded business. Confirmation of the minutes. I'm assuming that the minutes are all in order. Can I call for a mover and a seconder, please? Deputy Mayor Salisbury is moving the minutes, and Councillor Cloud. Thank you. Are there any discussion on the minutes at all? All those in favour of accepting the minutes, please say aye. Against, abstentions, and carried. Thank you very much. Declaration of conflicts of interests. Is there anything from anyone other than what we have recorded previously? Thank you very much. Deputations, presentations, and petitions. I don't believe there are any, nor are there recommendations from other committees, which leads us to 10.1, the avocado tree at number 5, 13th Avenue. We have, I think, 9 speakers, and I'd like to welcome Brian Askin to take the mic, please. Thank you, Brian, and welcome.
That on? Yep. My name is Brian Askin. My wife Gabriel and I have lived at 7 13th Avenue, Tauranga for 18 years. We oppose the application of G&L Beetlheim as set out in our original appeal to Council's decision dated the 14th of July 2020. A copy of our appeal is attached in the marked, and you've all got a copy, I gather, of what I'm speaking on. I'm not going to speak on items 1.3, 1.4, 1.5 to try and save a little bit of time because it's all covered in the executive summary and other speakers will speak to it. So I'll go directly to 1.6. Notwithstanding that the property at 5 13th Avenue is outside the proposed plan change 26 intensification area, there is no obligation or requirement that the subject land should be further intensified. An objective of the city plan is that there should be a range of dwelling types and intensities that is compatible with existing and anticipated residential character, amenity and environment characteristics. In terms of intensification, the project creates just one additional dwelling and does not lead to a significant intensification gain for the city. The site, which is an area of 809 square metres and 23.12 metres of road frontage, can easily be developed for intensification with a single street access and shared driveway, as can be observed in literally hundreds of other properties around the city. As detailed in Council's executive summary, the applicants were advised by Council staff on at least 3 separate occasions to reconsider their proposal and look at alternative design options. There is not only no need for 2 separate street access, but there is a safety issue from an additional driveway, given its proximity to St Mary's School and the high pedestrian usage created by children from that school. On the evidence provided, there is no substantive reason to overturn the original council decision to decline the application for the tree to be removed. It is very clear that the only reason for consideration being given for the tree to be removed is to facilitate the development that is proposed by the resource consent that is currently being processed by council for 2 dwellings to be built at number 5 13th Avenue. The proposal is for each dwelling to have an individual access from the street, and one of the driveways would require the removal of the avocado tree. This application is at variance with most other resource consent applications by the level of entitlement, misleading information and manipulation of process to achieve results inconsistent with the city plan, as the applicant has assumed that the mature avocado tree in the street berm could be destroyed along with another mature tree which has already been cut down, when they were aware that this was contrary to council's vegetation and tree management policy. B, they've assumed that they could demolish an existing block wall along their boundary with the school and that they could create an unfenced stepped access directly onto the school land and without consultation with the school authority. C, they've assumed that they could dispose stormwater from their property through private school land without an easement or consulting the landowners. They've assumed that they could use existing neighbours' boundary walls as their retaining wall. They propose to build 2 out-of-character barn-like buildings on their property, and then being misleading by omission of information as to the true effects they will have on the existing environment and the adjoining neighbours, including daylighting and yard encroachment. They've stated that the site coverage exceeds the maximum permitted coverage by 45%, of 45% by 4.6, when it isn't disputably, it's over 10%. They've applied for consent for 2 dwellings on 1 title, but stated in the application that once constructed it would be subdivided. They've subdivided land into 2 lots. No reason was given as to why the resource consent did not include the subdivision, which is very, very strange. This subdivision would have incorporated significant non-compliance in respect to side yard and daylighting from the proposed boundary between the 2 two-storied buildings. They will use dispensation provisions as owners of both buildings to overcome the non-compliance, which makes a complete mockery of the yard and daylighting rules of the city plan and would be inconsistent with the objectives and policies of the plan and council's requirement for good urban design. The intention of the dispensation provision is to allow for minor encroachments that the adjoining owners agree after considering the effects it would have on the existing property. It would be fair to assume it was never envisaged that dispensation would be used by developers to facilitate the approval of 2 adjacent 2-storey buildings 2.1 metres apart over a length of some 24 metres. The development proposed in the resource consent applies to number 5 13th Avenue. It's out of character with the neighbouring properties. The site has special and valuable characteristics in respect to its location and aspect, which is why it was left out of Plan Change 26, that makes a single dwelling in keeping with the adjacent houses appropriate. Unfortunately, the 2-dwelling proposal not only destroys the natural attributes of this site, but it significantly impacts on the amenity values of the adjacent properties and character of the area. I know I've got limited time, so I'm going
And
to
Mr.
leave.
Askin, I hate to say this, but their time is up. Did you want to round off?
I would like to round
Thank
off
you.
just as quoting a short, brief thing of what happened yesterday, which I think relates to this tree quite well, and I'd appreciate if I could have this time. A young bloke arrived on a bike yesterday and stopped on the tree. My wife was outside. She spoke to him. He has obviously taken avocados from this tree before. He said he wanted to get some avocados. Most of the avocados in the lower area had been picked. We had an extension avocado picker that he used to, and he took it and he climbed up the tree and he got about a couple of dozen avocados. He came down, there was somebody passing, he gave a couple of avocados to the person passing. I then spoke to him and he was unemployed. He lived in a home with 14 other people and he was getting the avocados to give to them. He was concerned about the employment situation. He told me he was going to go to a course as a forklift operator. I talked about roading and civil construction, what have you, and we had a general discussion about this. And anyway, he grabbed his avocados and went merrily on his way. And the reason I cite this is that this is just one of numerous occasions where this tree has acted as a catalyst to encourage people to talk about the tree, the avocados that are there. And I would just finish by saying that this will be a double travesty if you allow this to happen. We will get a construction of 2 dwellings on a site that is a brilliant piece of land, faces north, views of the harbour, access to the harbour, everything, a swimming pool, everything you want. It's being ruined by 2 inappropriate houses, and to facilitate this development, we're going to have an avocado tree destroyed. I ask you to please decline this application. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We really appreciate you coming and talking to us today. Thank you. Aaron Collier. Mr. Collier, thank you.
Good morning, Your Worship, councillors, council staff. My name is Aaron Collier. I'm a planner and I appear in support of the submission that was made by the Askins. The councillors may not be aware that the proposal to remove the tree forms part of a resource consent proposal by the applicant. The proposal is to redevelop the site on 13th Avenue by establishing 2 dwellings which do not comply with a number of requirements under the Tauranga City Plan. And resource consent's been sought as a discretionary activity, with council's discretion being unrestricted. And so as part of that process, I have assessed the proposal, and there are many matters of non-compliance, including boundary setbacks and height relative to the boundaries, engineering performance standards, and site coverage. It's my opinion that the applicant has sought to over-intensify development of the site by not complying with a number of these standards in the city plan, which are in place to ensure good amenity outcomes. These relate to site coverage in the main, which, if exceeded, has quite wide-ranging effects, including the ability to provide for sufficient access, driveway locations, on-site manoeuvring views and outlook. Exceeding coverage limits the potential for on-site planting and trees as well, and can result in adverse amenity outcomes on neighbours. The removal of the mature avocado tree from the front of the site, in my view, adds to these poor outcomes. So this resource consent has not yet proceeded to a point where a notification decision's been made, and as part of the application, one of the proposed dwellings is dependent on the removal of the avocado tree. Having reviewed the application, there are no alternatives which have been considered to work around the tree and retain it as an important part of the streetscape and amenity of the area. I agree with the conclusions of Council's urban forester, Richie Goldstone, that there are many benefits of this tree that it provides, and there are also other designs that can incorporate the tree to remain within the design. I note, in addition to the avocado tree being removed, there's also 2 other trees which are to be removed. One is already gone, and that's a silver birch. This tree is, in my opinion, an example of a mature tree in a location where mature trees are most appreciated, particularly given the local character of the area. The tree dominates the streetscape, and I describe the area's amenity as being made up of low-density development, wide street booms, mature trees and open spaces, including the adjacent school. In my opinion, the removal of the tree is materially linked to the resource consent application, because as a discretionary activity, the council is required to make a decision encompassing the whole of activities to which the application relates. In substance, the determination cannot be restricted in part, i.e. just to the site, as by its very nature, a discretionary activity means that the council's discretion is unfettered and is required to be applied broadly across all effects. By applying for the removal of the tree prior to the resource consent being decided, the applicant has unbundled this component of the activity, and that's not appropriate in my view to unbundle this tree from the resource consent, given the many matters of non-compliance directly relating to amenity and character considerations. And the tree is part of those wider considerations. So in my view, the applicant's resource consent will also require public notification. And this is on the basis that the applicant has not responded to requests made by the council to provide information requested by the agreed timeframe that was imposed by the council under section 92 of the RMA. Mandatory public notification of such applications is required under section 95C of the RMA. If the resource consent is ultimately not granted, then there becomes no reason for the tree to be removed. I'd now like to just turn briefly to your tree vegetation policy. The policy contains 2 key objectives. One is to generally protect the trees in the city which are mature tree assets, and the second is to recognise the visual character and amenity and natural features of the city, and to provide a sense of scale to complement built form through vegetation and planting. Clause 561 of your policy sets out a number of criteria to be applied, and I've noted those in 1.18 of my statement. The proposal does not comply with any of those criteria. The applicant also produced an arborist report which didn't consider those criteria, so we have commissioned Richard McCormick, who has also prepared an arborist report. Mr. McCormick's report's attached to my statement of evidence, and his conclusions are that the tree is in excellent condition. I'm also, as a planner, quite concerned about precedent effects and what will be created here if the council will allow any developer to remove a mature tree for no specific reason. In my view, given the policies are not met, the reason that's been given for the removal of the tree in the staff recommendation was that a feature of the Te Papa spatial plan allows for intensification. Now, as Mr. Askins noted, the site is not in that area, and intensification isn't proposed because effectively the site is complying in terms of density.
Mr.
So-
Collier, sorry to interrupt. I wonder if you could just round out, please. Thank you.
Yeah, so my conclusions are that it's premature for the council to make a decision on the approval for the for the tree removal, given the resource consent is still to be determined. There's 23 metres of frontage, and there's the ability for alternatives to be considered. The proposal would create a precedent effect. The tree is thriving in its location, as has been noted by Mr. McCormick in his report, which is attached to my evidence. And finally, the applicant's proposal isn't in an intensification zone. So thank you. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, sir. We appreciate you coming in today. Next is Barbara and Graham Fraser. Fraser. Right. And welcome. And you have 5 minutes each or 10 minutes between you. Thank you.
Good morning, councillors, Mr Mayor. Thank you for agreeing to hear our appeals against the decision taken by the General Manager of Community Services, Gareth Wallace. Is he here today? Could he identify himself? Oh, hi. To allow the cutting down of a much valued tree in our street. The speakers are going to deal with various issues today, but I'm going to just limit my comments to two. And this relates to the way in which the applicants have used tactics to to try and put pressure on council to move quickly to make a decision on taking away the tree. And I want to reassure you that you don't need to move quickly. The developers have put a lot of pressure on council people to move quickly towards granting consent for cutting down the tree and resource consent for the development. Well, this pressure is unjustified. Why? The first reason they've used is that they have a sale for one of the properties. And they have pleaded that they cannot change their design because they have a sale. Well, this is misleading. A sale can only be completed when there is a house to sell. At present, all they have are drawings on a page. So legally speaking, no sale has been completed. In any case, why should this be an issue for council or anyone else? It is the developer's problem. They chose to market a concept that they knew was non-compliant. Point 2, resource consent application. The developers have stated that the only issue in the way of gaining resource consent is the tree consent. This is no longer correct. It has been revealed that they and their architect and their planners appear to have chosen an incorrect ground level for overshadowing purposes. Instead of using original ground levels, they have incorrectly used new ground levels on our side of the boundary that were created when we built our property. In choosing to use the incorrect levels, contrary to the city plan overshadowing rules, they have used levels that are in the vicinity of 850 millimetres higher than they are entitled to. This is a serious problem for their current design and will need to be resolved before a consent can be issued. Now, councillors, please see attached to my speaking notes a letter from Lysart surveyors confirming the error in terms of the overshadowing measurements. I add that we and our advisors believe that there are other serious breaches and rule abuses contemplated in their design. We are investigating these, but I must say it is under duress because the resource consent has not been notified. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Barbara.
Good morning. Good morning. I've made, you will have our original submissions and would have read those, but I've made some additional submissions to those already filed because we had new information come in with the council agenda that I'd like to speak to. So as these additional submissions haven't been included in your information package, I've provided copies for you and ask that you read these before you make your decision. as I've had to abbreviate my additional speaking to my additional submissions due to the time limits imposed on me in this forum.
Barbara, sorry to interrupt. Can you just bend your mic down a bit so we can
Oh,
hear you? Thank you.
Okay. The point is, I've got additional submissions to make. These are really important. You've got the paper, but you haven't read them before because they're new. So, although I'm speaking to them and I have to cut it short. Right. I've now read the reasons for the General Manager's decisions as well as all other documents that were made available to me. I've concluded the simple answer to this issue goes right back to the initial conversations between Parks and Environment team member and the applicants and their planner. That is, to resolve this issue, the design should be modified to enable a single accessway and shared driveway. If Council insisted on this, the positive outcomes would include: 1. The community would retain their valued tree. 2. Reinstate safety for the St Mary's school pupils by having one less access way to negotiate. 3. Reinstate the lost car park for school pickups and drop-offs. 4. Be fair to other people who have complied with constraints of this nature or other constraints in the city plan that are designed to have better planning outcomes for the city. 5. The council still achieves its intensification objectives because there will still be 2 houses rather than 1. 6. The consequential downscaling of the development would allow their compliance within the site coverage rules. To explain, the proposed development exceeds allowable site coverage by more than 10%. If the developers shaved off some of this excess, there would be plenty of room for an on-site shared driveway. Case law establishes that a decision made in exercising a discretionary authority should not be excessively restrictive on one hand and not create adverse effects on the other. A decision to retain the tree, A, would not be excessively restricted on the development since the tree was there long before the developers arrived and there are design options to avoid that. B, it would respect the amenity values of the St Mary's neighbourhood and the mitigations that were part of the St Mary's School resource consent. My review of the reasons for the General Manager Community Services decision as provided with the Council agenda follows. Reason 1, mitigation. In addition to our comments on the mitigation offered at page 5 of our appeal submissions, I refer you to the Urban Forester's explanation to the developer's planner on the 12th of June. He said, it's the size, form and age of the tree that is important, not so much that it is a fruiting tree, although that does add more benefit. The planting of replacements as mitigation will require 40 years to realise and receive the return benefit, at which it is likely that further projects may take place and the return is actually never realised. So the loss is always a loss that will never be replaced. This acknowledges the significantly lower value of replacement immature trees and also acknowledges the risk that any mitigation plantings will be removed at some point given their lower value than a mature tree. Mitigation theft is a reality and is evident in the applicant's RC application. This happened when the city traffic engineer told the council's planner that the parking space that would be removed to allow the access way was not allocated to any activity and is no way required to be provided by council. This despite council's involvement in the St Mary's resource consent process and any continuing obligation it has in relation to this. This demonstrates the limited value of mitigations that are either not enforced or not enforceable. Reason 2, the avocado tree is a non-native species and is prevalent across the Bay of Plenty. The vegetation tree policy is concerned with amenity values and is concerned with the local environment. Plantings in areas miles away are of no relevance. There is no reason for exotic plants or trees to be removed simply because they are not natives. This would put 14 of 18 large mature trees in our end of 13th Avenue at risk. This would also put a high proportion of Tauranga City's mature trees at risk. It should be sufficient that it is a mature tree that is an integral and valued part of the character of our neighbourhood. Reason 3, the feedback letter. The developers complained about the feedback letter and didn't like that it told the residents to ignore the letter that they had dropped off to neighbours. The council's feedback letter was a simple survey as to whether the neighbours wanted the established tree to be retained. We expect that council's reference to ignoring the developer's letter was to neutralise misleading statements that were made in that letter. These being A, people could have been misled to believe that there was no design change that would have enabled retention of the tree, whereas in fact there is a simple and viable option. B, the statement that any alternative design would not be consistent with the city's.
Mrs. Interrupt. Could you round out, please? You've had your combined 10 minutes. Thank you. Can I
And tell you what my conclusions are.
very happy for you to table that document, Mrs. Fraser, if that hasn't already been done.
And what concerns me is that you people are going to be making this decision before you've had an opportunity to read it. Which, is there an opportunity to read my document before?
Which we can do. We do have a very full agenda, but we are open to doing that. If there's information... Sorry, you go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like that because I think it would be the democratic and fair thing to do, given that I wasn't given the information in time.
Okay.
Okay, can I just do my conclusions? I've chopped out quite a lot. Okay, our conclusions. The General Manager, A, failed to consider the considerably higher amenity value of established trees in the context of our older, more established neighbourhood. B, he wrongly implied a diminished amenity value of an established tree simply because it is of non-native species and that there are plantings some miles away. C, made fundamental errors in his response to the developer's complaints which resulted in disenfranchising those people who responded through the consultation process. D, he hasn't explained how this proposed development would have any positive income in the furtherance of the city's intensification objectives. E, he failed to consider advantages of a scaled down design that would use a single access shared driveway. We are not alone in the view that a community asset should not be treated as a private asset. Our neighbourhood have made it clear that this is our asset. There is no just cause for council to take this away from us. The General Manager's administrative actions in this case bears no relationship to the general purpose for which the discretionary powers have been conferred on him. The decision he made is an overreach of his discretionary authority. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Appreciate you both coming in today. Can I call on Phil Green, please? If Phil's... Thank you, Mr. Green.
I'm on. Okay. Good morning, Mayor Tembe, esteemed councillors, CEO Marty. You know me as Phil Green, Chair of Grainra, and I also wear many other hats. And unfortunately, as the report in the paper had me listed as an architect, I'm not a registered architect. I'm actually a professional architectural designer, and I've been practicing for something like too many years to think, but it's near enough to 45 to 50 years. Hope I don't look that old. Anyway, so as I said, I wear many hats, but today I am an avocado tree. I stand trembling in the morning light, not from the stirring breeze, but from fear my life will be cut short by a chainsaw. You talk of intensifying your housing. I can see why you need to do and why, but why not plan your changes so that I and my brothers and sisters, my taku tuakana and my taku tuahine, help enhance your work? Work with me, not against me, for I am more than just an object. I am a living entity. I may not be a native tree, but I am like them in that my roots are firmly grounded in Papatuanuku. I have stood here and grown, weathered storms and scorching heat. I have stood sentinel over 40 plus generations of your children walking to their first day at school. I have shaded you on those long hot Kiwi summer days. In my canopy are fruits to feed you. I share my branches with all the birds and insects of your community. I am part of your community. Killing me and replacing me with other young saplings elsewhere will not fill the gap that I leave. I am healthy, I am strong, I am part of your community. I am an avocado. Thank you. Someone else can use my
Thank
other 4
you,
minutes.
Mr. Green. That's a wonderful
I like to challenge
view of
you
the
guys.
avocado tree. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Would you like to table that document? I suspect a number of people wouldn't mind having a look at it. Yeah, great. Thanks very much, Phil. Yeah, thank you. Can I call on Christine Price, please? Is Christine here? Thank you. Welcome. It's all on, Christine. You have 5 minutes. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Temby and esteemed councillors for giving me the opportunity to speak today as part of a ratepayer in Tauranga City Council. I feel very fortunate. I'm here in the matter of the application to remove an avocado tree from the reserve burn outside 13th Ave. In the matter of my submission is opposing the application by myself and my husband Tom Lehner to 13th Avenue, which is directly across the road from number 5 13th Ave. We oppose the application as set out in original appeal to the Council's decision dated 21st of July 2020 for 2 reasons. The removal of the mature avocado tree and the removal of a parallel car park. We have 3 main concerns to outline today, and all of our concerns are around the fact that due process has not been carried out in this instance, and a level playing field for all ratepayers have not been demonstrated. With regard to the removal of the tree, it is worth noting from the council agenda, the specific design offered by the applicant has shown the car parking spaces for 5A in a position that is not practically able to be accessed because of the position of the avocado tree. The applicant's architect has designed the residential design layout without due consideration of the protection of the avocado tree and have assumed the removal of the tree would go ahead despite the overwhelming feedback from the local community. Of the 29 households in the community that responded, 28 of those houses opposed for the avocado tree. That's 96%. The council received 28 submissions, with 20 opposing this. 2 weeks later, this decision was overturned by the General Manager of Community Services with no credible justification. This goes against the Vegetation and Tree Management Policy 2014 5.61. This tree is not a health and safety risk. This is not a threat to a property, but both public and private, not disease, and it's well established, and from a recent arborist survey was in excellent condition and will bear fruit for another 20 to 30 years. Tauranga City Council have made no attempt to challenge the developers to offer an alternative design which incorporates the avocado tree. As per the Local Government Act 2002, a local authority should conduct its business in a democratic manner and be aware of the views of its community and ratepayers. The purpose of a local government is to enable democratic local decision making. 28 households, 96% opposed the removal of the tree, and only one household was in favour. This should be taken into account by council when making its final decision. As other applicants here, they've valued the tree is highly valued and is considered a key asset to the area. As a young mum, I have 2 young boys under the age of 4. I have concerns with regard to the removal of a car park on 13th Ave, directly outside this property and just down from St Mary's. The design layout for number 5 includes 2 driveways, which eliminates a much needed parallel car park. We live directly across the road, and I work from home every day, and I witness the sheer traffic that St Mary's generates. Mums and dads trying to get there early to secure a car park so they can drop their children off safely. And they arrive significantly early for the school collection. They arrive at 2 p.m. for a 3 p.m. pickup. Removing a car park adds to the already dangerous situation where children's safety is involved, and it's not keeping in the needs of the community. My third and final point is regards to the lack of alternatives presented by the applicant. It is apparent the applicant progressed with the design of the unit, which is subsequently sold without consent or approval for the removal of the tree beforehand. This appears to be why the applicant has stated that they are unable to modify the design. And I feel that they've taken a usurp approach, and that they've leveraged their business influence or clout within the community. The property's frontage is not limited or restricted as such that the development cannot work around the tree. A single access with shared driveway is possible for a 809 metre squared section and 23 metres wide site. Repeatedly, the Tauranga City Council Urban Forest team met with the owner, the applicant, the planner, on the 12th of March and the 18th of March, and not once did the applicant come with a solution to work around the tree because they had subsequently already sold it off plan. Instead, the applicant offered to pay for removal of the tree and replanting as part of the mitigation offer to ensure it had minimal impact to current freehold design to proceed as is. In my thoughts, that's another 40 years that we have to wait for these trees to add that value again. In conclusion, I strongly urge the council to decline the application of the removal of the tree and to work with the applicant on alternative designs to protect and maintain that beautiful tree, which would allow the retention of the tree and also that valued parallel car park for young mums and dads picking up their children safely. And removing this is of value only to the applicant and is a detriment to the community. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Christine. Much appreciated.
Any questions?
Thank you. Can I call on Amanda Moore, please, if Amanda's here? Thank you very much. Thank you, Amanda. The microphone is already on. You have 5 minutes. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Good morning, Council. My name is Amanda Moore. I'm the planning consultant for the applicants. I work with Momentum Planning and Design. I'm going to cover off why this development at 513th Ave achieves good design principles and realises good amenity outcomes that includes replacement trees and is consistent with the Tauranga City Plan and New Zealand urban design principles and what the Tauranga City Council is trying to achieve with intensification in the Te Papa Peninsula. The 809 square metre site at 513th Ave can accommodate 2 independent dwelling units under the permitted density rules of the Tauranga City Plan. This is the current anticipated low density character of this immediate area. It is located within the Te Papa Peninsula where intensification is proposed in some parts of the area under Plan Change 26. But the proposed dwellings at 513th Ave are not intensification as defined by the Tauranga City Plan. This is not increasing the density beyond the permitted low density, but this site is a quality infill opportunity in the Te Papa Peninsula. Infill development avoids the substantial costs of turning greenfield land into development-ready land. This is consistent with the objective of enabling more intensification at the Te Papa Peninsula. A future subdivision consent will be lodged around the proposed dwellings. The layout of the sites with both fronting the street and thereby requiring direct access to the street is consistent with Tauranga City Plan objectives and policies for subdivision, optimising frontage to the street and providing good orientation to sunlight. That's why I can't see. The sites will both benefit from the northerly aspect. The proposed development is also consistent with the suburban residential zoning objectives and policies. For example, it can be efficiently serviced by existing infrastructure, has particular regard to landscape character and maintains that character and amenity, ensures buildings are set back from the road boundary to provide a consistent streetscape, and encourages passive surveillance of the road, crime prevention through environmental design. This is a key urban design principle. Enabling dwellings to both have an address to the street is important, as rear lots do not provide connection to the street, community, or amenities for the lots. Rear lot development should be avoided where possible, and only used where a comprehensive development or other outcome is not possible. For this site, this can be achieved, and therefore is the best design outcome. For any design process, options are always considered. In this instance, the proposed design achieved the urban design principles with the removal of the existing tree able to be mitigated by quality and appropriate street tree replanting funded by the applicant. This then presented the best design solution. The resource consent that is currently lodged and being processed was required to assess 3 matters only, under the Tauranga City Plan: dwellings in a flood hazard plan area, associated earthworks, and site coverage. That's it. The land use resource consent matters have all been sufficiently addressed within the application, and further information has been provided to Council. The effects assessment has been accepted by the Council, even though it has not been granted, and the proposed development is consistent with the anticipated bulk, scale, and character of the immediate and wider streetscape. It is only the separate tree removal application that is delaying the issuing of the consent. When the original asset owner approval was lodged with Parks and Environment at Council for the removal of the tree, the applicants sought to understand the process to ensure they were providing all relevant information. Any urban design principles and the legislative planning environment were factors that did not appear to be considered. The advice given was that the existing vegetation and tree management policy did not allow for other legislation or planning documents to be taken into account when making decisions on these applications. The overall approach to the development at 513th Ave has been around fulfilling the need for further housing in existing suburban areas, good urban design principles, recognition of character with appropriate and comprehensive mitigation methods, and ensuring consistency with the Tauranga City Plan objectives and policies. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Amanda. Much appreciated. Can I call on Brendan Gordon, please? Go.
You said 5 minutes. I wonder if I may have one question, please. Since you are the planner, I just wanted to ask, given the national policy statement on urban development is removing all parking requirements, and I understand as a council we'll be the first in the country to implement that within a few months, could that make a difference to the design that's being proposed so that you could achieve what you want to achieve without that tree being removed?
I mean, yeah, it's possible, but I think this design is still the best design to achieve what we're trying to do in this current environment right now. Me personally, no, I'm not the designer.
Could re-look at it knowing that that is new information. It's only just...
Anybody could re-look at anything that's currently being lodged at the moment. Anything. Any development could be re-looked at.
Councillor Borlock, are there any other questions of... Thank you very much, Amanda. Can I call on Brendan Gordon, please? Thank you, Mr. Gordon. See, the microphone is on, and you have 5 minutes, sir. Thank you very much.
Good morning, councillors and mayor. My name's Brendan Gordon. I'm a local architect, a registered architect, and I have a significant background in, and I've lived in Tauranga and grew up in Tauranga and know Tauranga very, very well. The development which has been designed for 13th Ave respects the context of the neighbourhood in terms of its site articulation and the palette of materials and things used in the design. You've all got my submission of what I wrote as part of the... Yeah, so rather than going through that, I'd rather refute or discuss some of the propositions that have been forwarded today, and really like to establish some facts around the application and the status and the reason why we're in today's meeting. So the reason that we're in today's meeting is around obviously the removal of the avocado tree. That tree, as has been identified, sits outside the resource consent process, and so we have a fully compliant development. Yes, there were 3 issues. It's not a developer wanting to stack and pack a big development. It is introducing one new house additional on an 809 square metre site. Each site would be over 400 square metres. The minimum requirement under the city plan is 325 square metres. We are well in excess. It is not an intensive development. I'd like to make that very clear for a start. It's not intensification and a development which is exaggerative or overstepping what is contextual with the existing neighbourhood. The 2 neighbouring houses are 2-storied houses with driveways fronting the streets and front doors fronting the street. These have exactly the same. The neighbouring houses have setbacks according to the daylighting and all of the planning requirements. These are exactly the same. So we need to park the intensification, excuse the pun, we need to park the idea of whether we're going to have no car parks, because I don't know about you, Larry, but I think living within a house with no car parks might create some issues more for the street probably, because where would you park? And also around that is that the shared driveway scenario, as there have been a lot of scenarios proposed as far as alternate designs, anybody with a shared driveway would not want to have one. And they are not an ideal design scenario. Having a clean slate, having that tabula rasa, having the ability to design what can be best to go onto that site is what has been put forward in the proposal. There are 2 sites side by side, so they load from the south. The cars are taken care of efficiently, and clearly a lot of the site isn't used up in driveways and cars, so therefore the site can be left for landscaping, for planting, and for the house and for the amenity of the owners. The houses load from the south and they open, all the living is out to the front, out to the park, out to the waterfront, out to the sun. They're all set back to give good amenity, good sunlight between the houses and to the neighbouring houses. So the intensification and these claims around that there is some form of invalidity in the application are not accurate. The resource consent has been granted, it's been parked, because the tree removal and the process around the tree removal sat outside the resource consent process. So with it sitting outside, that required some delegations and some communication, some work with the council to decide how that was going to be affected. As we went through that process, it was clear that the tree removal process was made by the tree, Richard Goldsmith, by tree people, for tree people, and only with regard. He said, I don't know anything about architecture, I don't know anything about urban design, I don't know anything about streetscapes and landscaping. I know about trees. So we thought that was a little bit of a biased approach to maintain that the decision-making process was about trees was really just by and for trees. So that was where we questioned and said, well, really, there are bigger picture things. And this development, we've always said that we would replace the tree. It was never about removal. And there have been other trees removed in berms in lots of places, and I'm sure, and when we look at the aerial photos, there was a tree removed by the neighbour when his house was built. And that was replaced by not a mature tree. It's now a mature tree. And so I think we just need to have some clarity around the resource consent application is compliant and the design is very good.
Tremendous, Mr. Gordon. Thank you very much.
Any questions?
Thank you, sir. Lastly, can I call on Gary and Luann, is it Bethlehem? Bethlehem? Thank you. Good. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. You have 5 minutes. Thanks so much.
Good morning, councillors. morning. My name is Luann and this is my husband Gary Bettelheim, and we are the owners and the family at 5 13th Avenue. Just before, I guess, Gary starts, I did want to discuss a couple of items that the appealers continue to state, which is untrue, and I think it's only fair that you hear what is actually factual. Mr. Collier referred to the removal of a silver birch tree, which was to allow for the bungalow that was previously on the site to be rehomed. That was approved by council. We have answered all council queries in a timely manner in respect to this project. We have willingly agreed to extend the resource consent process to allow for today's meeting. Our plans are compliant. And finally, we're a family. We're not developers. We are a family with 2 children who love living in that avenue's wonderful location. Just before Gary starts, can I ask that the document that we prepared this morning, one pager just with a couple of photographs on it, has been distributed, please? It's quite important. It was just a thank you.
Yes, it has, Luann. Yep.
Lovely, thank you.
Right, thank you. Good morning. We believe we have been sympathetic to our immediate neighbours as we have briefed our architect to ensure the design had a minimal impact on our neighbours at number 3 and number 7. Our design of 2 side-by-side homes has enabled us to position the buildings approximately 7 metres back from the northerly harbour boundary. That's obviously significantly more setback than what is permitted. That boundary, although it fronts the harbour, is a side boundary effectively, and we could be within 1.5 metres of that. We chose not to do that, and the side-by-side design allows us to come back that 7 metres, and both neighbours will maintain and enhance their current aspects. I think the impact of the replacement of the avocado will be minor on the overall feel of 13th Avenue. It is currently a well-established street, and evidence of tree removals over the years has proven that mitigation planting can achieve a positive outcome in a reasonable time frame. And I think 40 years is obviously an exaggeration, and that's why we refer to that extra piece of paper. That indicates a replacement tree outside number 7. It's a very good example of how a development can be achieved with little or no adverse effects on the overall feel of the neighbourhood. In the first photo, one of the photos, the aerial photos, shows a huge tree being removed prior to the development. It's got the old house on at number 7. It was removed some years ago, and now the other more recent photo is of the berm and the tree on the replacement tree on the berm, and you can see how established that is, and it has certainly added to the amenity of 13th Avenue. We are committed to the council planting plan, and obviously we are very happy to plant whatever trees that are recommended. There's been a lot of discussion as to what sort of trees would be right, but we'll take the guidance from our council and arborists on that one. We believe the replacement of one fruit tree will not have significant impact on the avenue's treescape, especially when it's being replaced by a more suitable council-approved species. I guess in answering a couple of other points which people made, we've lived at 13th Ave for 5 years. Obviously people have lived there a bit more, but we have been exposed to the avocado tree and what it means to people also. The reality of the situation is that the fruit is beneficial to a very limited number of people, mainly the neighbour who has a tree, has a pole that can get the fruit. The fruit's basically too high for everyone else to get to. Essentially what happens is maybe one guy did come along yesterday and take some fruit, but what we've witnessed over the last 5 years is that young teenagers come along, strip the tree. They're the only people that can climb it. They strip the tree totally. They take the proceeds back to Otomaito Road and retail it for substantial profit. I don't think it's benefiting the community with that happening, and that really is what happens every year. The fruit is impossible to get out without a pole, and then what happens is the rest of the fruit that is very high basically gets overripe and eventually falls off. And
Gary, I hate to interrupt, but your time is up.
Sure.
Did you want to just summarise?
Yep.
10
Thank
minutes
you.
between us, though, sorry?
Was that, yeah, I think you only asked for 5 between you,
Oh,
as I understand.
no, we asked for 10, sorry. We're nearly finished.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. So as I say, the only thing that benefits from the rotten fruit or the ripe fruit is the attraction for the rats and the seagulls. There's no native birds get anything to do with that fruit. The seagulls dominate it. I think the approval of the avocado to be replaced allows the best building design principles to be achieved while fully respecting the context of our neighbourhood.
And this, the final comment, is the community is clearly not as against the removal of the tree as first thought. Once the full information was circulated, the level of support has been significant. We've personally received written support from 12 neighbours in the immediate area, and there's many more that were not prepared to put their name to the situation. So, thank you all.
Thank you both. Councillor Arbery.
Sorry, just a question for staff. I assume the presentations are finished. Are we able to defer this decision to a Resource Management Act commission? We're just donkey deep in planning detail here, and I think it's over the expertise of many people around this table.
Through you, Mr Mayor, I can provide a response to that. So I'm Barbara Dempsey, I'm General Manager for Regulatory and Compliance. Many of the speakers are correct, Councillor, is that there is 2 processes. The Council has received an application for resource consent, and with the design or the specific design that was within that application, the applicant required access to their site. So as the tree is not a protected tree, the applicant required the landowners, the council, their permission to remove the tree to gain access. And some of the comments that have been brought up today are certainly known by the planners in regards to site coverage, surveying, density. They're all things that would be considered in a normal process of considering a resource consent application. But the main reason that the application is on hold, because as I say, for this specific design, the applicant needed access. So in my view, it's the RMA process continues as per normal under the RMA and the Tauranga City Plan, and this decision is about whether the landowner gives permission to have the tree cut down to have access to the site. And, that could be subject to conditions, but they would not be conditions that are inclusive of the resource consent.
I'd like to move when ready. What are the recommendations?
Thank you. Just before further questions, I'm just going to ask Gareth to just to talk to this, given the implications that have been submitted here today. Thanks, Gareth.
Kia ora tātou. I don't really have a lot to add. There's been a lot of opinion around the table today. Staff's opinions contained within the report. The Manager, Parks and Environment original decision for declining the removal of the tree is in bullet point 20, and my decision and the bullet points surrounding the reason to overturn that decision are in bullet point 21. We did just want to table a suggestion in regards to the recommendations in that if the decision was to remove the tree, we could add a caveat that that wasn't to happen until such time as all relevant regulatory conditions were met. And that would save the tree being ripped out if at some point along the process this development fell over. So is there anything we wanted to add?
Thanks very much, Gareth. Are the councillors, are there questions of Gareth, please? Councillor Bullock. Sure.
Just further to the questions earlier, Barbara, there's 2 things been raised by the speakers this morning. One is, when would the decision be made about notification? But it seems to me that we're past that. But second question is, some have said that the resource consent hasn't been granted, whilst I think it was Brendan Gordon that said that it has, but it's been parked. Can you clarify, please, just where that situation sits?
Certainly, through you, Mr Mayor, the application is on hold. A notification decision has not been made at this time. So therefore no decision. So the process for a resource consent is the first decision is a notification decision. That's only made when we've got all the information that we're satisfied the application is complete. Once that decision's been made, well then that decides which path we go through following that decision.
So if I may, just a supplementary. So if we did decide this morning to make provision for the tree to be removed, there could still be a notification decision of limited notification or whatever that may allow neighbours to further engage. Possibility?
I'm supportive of what Gareth is saying, that a decision council could give a permission or a decision whereby the tree is cut down only or subject to the applicant successfully pursuing through the regulatory framework. That would be okay. The planning team have received community feedback. They've received letters from many people of the community or affected parties, and of course those comments will be taken into consideration. But the notification decision is really determined based on RMA and the city plan and the effects that would have in accordance with the plan. So yes, the team haven't made that decision yet, and it is a delegated decision made by the appropriate planner with the appropriate experience.
Thank you very much, Barbara. Councillors, any other questions of either Barbara or Gareth? Councillor Cloud.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure who can answer this question, but there's in paragraph 15 it says that a replacement tree of a large size cannot fit between those two driveways. So is there an actual placement already in mind where that larger tree will be located? Will it be very close to the existing tree?
Through the chair, no agreement's been received at this time, but obviously we'll be looking for something that offsets the amenity value of the one that was planned to be taken out as much as humanly possible.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillors, I'm conscious that you've got more information at hand. Do you want 5 minutes or so to look at
I'm
that
ready to
information?
move when you are.
Excuse me?
I'll be ready to move it when you...
All right, thank you. 5 minutes, right. Time by my watch is 10:37. Shall we leave it till, say, 10:45, which is about 8 minutes? Thanks so much. Welcome back, everybody. It is 10:45. Councillor, firstly, are there any additional questions? Councillor Robson.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. There's a question through to someone who knows something about trees on staff. How big a tree can we plant? So when you have a certain amount of berm space and you're looking to put a replacement tree in, how big a tree, all things considered, can we plant if we were to put a replacement in? I'm conscious of people shifting very large trees and replanting them.
Hello. Yeah, it's going to depend on the space we're given there, what services we're dealing with as well. So yeah, that's really what we need to work with. We haven't got that data yet, I don't think.
If I may, just assuming the services have been, because of the tremendous foresight of previous agencies, placed in a situation where they allow planting, my question still remains, how big a tree can we replant?
Again, we still need to know the dimensions of the area we've got to work with. Looking at the design they've got there, it's going to be a struggle to get something as large as what we've got there with the avocado, in my opinion.
Just through the chair, it was definitely our will, Councillor Robson, to plant something as big as we can, taking into consideration all of the constraints of the site, and so we'll just be trying, as if that's the decision, to replant as big as possible.
Thank you, Gareth. Any other questions, councillors? Thank you. Councillor Hughes, I think you were going to move this motion.
Yeah, I'd like to move B, that we decline the removal of the avocado tree outside 5 13th Avenue.
Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Marbury.
So if we decline this with this particular application and the developers go bring up a new design and put forward another design, is this decline permanent, or would we reconsider that down the line?
Barbara, thank you very much.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I think I'm going to answer the question correctly. If you declined to give permission to have the tree removed, that means that the applicant doesn't have access for this specific design. There is potential. They could then, and I don't know how doable this is because we don't have the information, the only option available to them then would be to do a redesign, and I have absolutely no idea whether that's doable or not because I haven't seen the paperwork. Is that what you were meaning?
Thank you. We don't have a seconder for...
I'm happy to second.
You're happy to second it? Okay, thank you. Councillor Hughes, did you want to talk to this?
Yeah, sure. When we did the spatial plan for Te Papa Peninsula, the community were asked what they value in an area when they're looking at intensification, and one of the biggest things that they valued was mature trees. We're building a city not for this generation, but for the next generation. And when we go to look at intensification of a city, it's not that intensification means that we then need to take up to each boundary and not to consider the fact that nature also exists in our city. It's for us to consider how would we want to live together in a community that is more intensified, but what is it that makes it a community that we also want to live in? And one of those things is bumping places. I really loved the community person that said people gather under that tree because there's a reason to talk about something. There's a place there, there's a community amenity there that says there's a reason for people to gather. And I really loved the other one about the avocado tree itself, and I think we can't forget that we live with nature. We live with nature, and the tree exists, and it has its own well-being, and we are responsible for the well-being of the natural environment that we live in as well. There's a lot of briefings that we get around climate change, we get briefings around storm control, we get briefings around what we need to do to enable our city to thrive, and keeping trees and keeping our environment and understanding that we are part of nature is part of that decision making that needs to happen. The other thing that we know that is that we represent our communities, and it's obvious when you hear the conversations here that the community value the tree. And in that light, I think we should keep the tree.
Thank you, Councillor Hughes. Councillor Arbery.
It seems that if we decline to remove the tree, the consequence of that is a shared driveway, which is some inconvenience to the new or future property owners. And if we keep the tree, that provides a lot of amenity for the local neighbourhood and apparently a good business enterprise for our enterprising young teenagers selling that in the market in Otamoito. So overall, I mean, it's a tricky one, but I think for me, rather keep the tree and have a shared driveway.
Thank you. Anyone else, Council? Or I put Councillor Clout.
Yeah, thank you. Just very simply, a couple of points. First of all, our city does require more housing. We know that. We've got a housing crisis. Now, presumably this will not be at the affordable end of the scale, I admit that. But any extra residential facility that we can have in our city, the better. The other thing is, I note that we're going to be replacing, or the owners are going to be replacing the one tree with a total of 3 trees, 2 small and 1 large. And we also know that in Tauranga, the environment, the climate is very conducive to trees growing quite quickly. So I don't buy into the argument that it's going to take 40 years to replace the amenity. So for those couple of reasons alone, I'll be voting against this. Thank you.
Councillor Robson.
The wonderful thing about debate is that occasionally someone throws in a little gem that prompts you to speak, when otherwise you might have been quiet. The idea that any additional housing is a good thing is frightening in its simplicity, absolutely frightening to me. I'm going to vote against this motion, and I'm happy to foreshadow moving an amended recommendation that was circulated earlier today. And in speaking to the foreshadowed motion, should this motion fail, my reasons effectively for voting against this one will become obvious. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hollis.
This isn't an intensification per se, it's an infill. And infill housing has happened thousands of times across this city, and it's just another one. It's no different to any of the others. So I just want to make it really clear that it's not specifically an intensification issue. An avocado tree comes to production in 5 years, and within 7 it's getting towards about half the size of a mature tree. We already know that most of the fruit wasn't eaten by humans. It sounds as if seagulls were having a good feed half the time. So a small tree is probably a better idea to keep it trimmed and useful. And I also note that within a few dozen yards down by the water are other large shady trees also beside a beach for people to gather and use for amenity. So it's not as if they're actually losing anything, they just have to take a few extra steps. I'll be voting against this as well.
Thank you. Anyone else? Thank you. Then I'll put the motion to you. At the moment, it's B, decline the removal of the avocado tree outside number 5, 13th Avenue. All those in favour, please say aye. Can I get your hands, can you hold your hands up, please? The motion is lost. Thank you. Councillor Robson. Oh, sorry, beg your pardon. All those against option B. Thank you. Any abstentions? The motion is lost. Councillor Robson, you had an amendment to make.
Yes, thank you. Earlier this morning, I believe it was, maybe last night after 5 o'clock, a amendment or a suggested amendment was circulated to elected members, and I'd like to move that amendment. We got it on screen there. which is allow for the removal of the avocado from outside 513th Avenue, subject to the project satisfying all relevant regulatory requirements. And if I have a seconder, I'm happy to speak to it.
You, Councillor Bullock, Councillor Robson.
Yeah, look, this is tough stuff. I love trees. I'm a green voter. Everything about this says to me I want that tree to stay. But I'm also a respecter of due process, and I think that it's on balance a precedent's been set. We've seen in this very street the removal of a tree and its replacement. I think people need to think in natural timeframes, not electoral cycles, not short term, but in the timeframes that nature gives us. And the wonderful thing about nature is, and I'm going to give her a gender, and I apologise for that, she is remarkably resilient. And I'm going to give humanity a gender, what mankind do to this planet, nature does its best to sort out. And anyone who remembers the Exxon Valdez and now visits that part of the world will understand how wonderful nature is at sort of addressing these issues. Our job, I believe, is to try and help that process, to be, as I think Councillor Hughes was urging us to be, good ancestors, as is the phrase, and to make sure that we provide a natural environment at least as good as the one we've inherited, preferably better, and we take a long-term view. At the same time, I'm loath to try and thwart our regulatory function by advancing arguments that, in the timeframes that I choose to view the world, I believe are not strong enough. My question about the size of the replacement is, I want to see trees. I want to see the biggest bloody tree possible in that street as soon as possible, subject to the risks of putting it in place. There's a precedent. We've been here before. And all those people who are not comfortable with what I'm proposing, I'd like them to go down and go under the tree that was planted so long ago in replacement. And just think about the sort of timeframes we should be thinking as city leaders. Not short term, not electoral, not virtue signalling, right? But just think. I'd urge everyone to support the motion. Thank you.
Councillor Bullock.
Yeah, I too support the motion. I did enjoy Phil Green's poem earlier, and based on some recent comments in the newspaper, I'm tempted to burst into song about the green, green grass of home and an old oak tree maybe, but I won't. This is a decision about a tree, and it isn't a resource consent decision, and I think that is what's important. We need to keep that clearly in mind. And it does seem like some of the concerns are more focused on what's going to be built on the site rather than the tree itself. And I don't want to get into that discussion. That is a regulatory decision, and I'm pleased it's been clarified. There may be an opportunity for nearby residents to still have a say in that consent decision, depending on the decisions of our staff. But today, as we talk about a tree, I do not see any real reason to put this tree ahead of a reasonable development on that site. We're very fortunate in this city that trees grow very fast and very well. We are well endowed with them. And as Councillor Robson has said, we can see evidence of one that was replaced, which I think should give us assurance of all of that. We're going to see a lot more happen in the intensification plans through the Te Papa Peninsula. When you look at the size of some of the trees up in the avenues, obviously there's going to have to be a lot of accommodation if we want to see a massive amount of intensification with 3-storey and so on going on. And this is just the beginning of perhaps more discussions we're going to have and decisions we're going to have to make. But today I would certainly support, subject to the relevant regulatory requirements being satisfied, that the tree can be removed.
Thank you, Councillor Baldock. Deputy Mayor Salisbury.
I also am genuinely torn between the desire to maintain a mature tree and the freedom people have to develop their property according to our city plan. And from these images, the neighbours have at some point also used their rights and our processes to remove and replace trees in front of their properties that now look beautiful. So this family has committed to replacing the tree with significant size and an appropriate trees, and so I will be supporting this motion.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councillor Cloud.
Thank you. I'll be supporting the resolution, obviously. Yes, of course, I feel sorry for the tree, but I take some comfort in the fact that we've spent 90 minutes speaking about its demise, unfortunately. But that's actually something that the tree itself will take, unfortunately, to its grave. Sorry.
Councillor Hughes.
Those of us that live in leafy, car-dependent suburbs on this committee, what we're trying to achieve here in our central city is a city for our future. I just want people to keep that in mind. When we replace trees, we diminish their value, and every time we diminish their value, it makes it easier to get rid of them in the future. So I hope that we can bear that in mind in our future, that mature trees have a value for the lifespan that they've been on this planet for, and new trees get devalued much faster than older trees. The new trees that have been replaced outside near my house get vandalised because they're small and they're weakened, and it's not an easy road to get to a mature tree, especially in this city. So I'll be supporting this motion because it's the second best option that we have for saving this tree, and I really hope that in the long run it manages to save it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? Councillor Kitty.
Thank you very much. Great debate going on here for avocado tree, which is excellent. I too will be supporting the motion purely for the fact that I think the architect has done a really good job of looking at the plans, looking at the landscape, and the owners and obviously everyone involved in this has said that we will be replacing it. I think we said 2 small and 1 large tree, and I think if the rest of the developments, follow this precedent, we'll end up with a beautiful green city. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else before I put the amended motion to you, Council? Which you can see on the board there, the amendment, of course, talking about the relevant regulatory requirements. So I put that to you. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Pardon, John, I didn't realise.
Yeah, just to make it clear, and at the risk of, damaging that short-term electoral cycle I referred to earlier, I abhor this proposed intensification, the amount of site coverage of it, the design of it. To me, it's at odds with the community it's being placed in. I know these things are judgment calls, but I just want to make it clear that this is not the sort of development that I value. I don't think it addresses the sort of issues the city's facing in any real way. I think it will, if we think about universalising this type of development and think about what that will do in terms of, if you like, the site coverage of that avenue, if everyone executed these rights in that space, it would frighten me. In so many ways, it would frighten me. It would be an abomination to leave that. But I've got to look at the issue as it's here. I just wanted to make sure that no one was under any misapprehension about what I see as good development, and the points that Councillor Hughes made. Think about the future, thinking about respecting and making sure we get a good green environment. There's a lot of this going to happen. A lot of this going to happen. The government has introduced advised us, decided that we are going to be a city that development is going to happen in, and the constraints that some people are used to or think they have are rapidly disappearing. More and more frequently, I'm visiting homeowners where the development next door is taking away views, light, amenity, trees. This apparently is what growth is about. And, you know, on the big question, I think we still need to talk to our community. But in this particular instance, as Councillor Hughes said, this is the second best option, but it's also for me the one that fits within the rules we set ourselves. We are embarking on a new city plan process. I would urge the community and all those passionate about what this place is going to look like for future generations to get involved in that process, understand that process, demand engagement from your council on that process, and do your best to make sure that the new city plan that is coming is not a developer's charter, but something that future generations will look back on and say, these people got it. These people knew we were coming. Yeah. Thank you.
Council, I'll put the amended motion to you. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Abstentions? Carried. Thank you very much. This takes us to 10.2, Maori representation, and we have Hui Kakaho. No, I beg your pardon, we've got Buddy, welcome. We have Warwick Lamp.
And Materia Duncan.
And Materia Duncan, thank you very much. If you could... Kia ora everybody, welcome. Does... Carlo, we have, thank you for being with us today. And we have Coral to take us through this and answer any questions. Before all that, can I just welcome Tamati Coffey, MP for Waitangi. Great to have you here, Tamati. Thank you for joining us today. Coral, are you going to kick us off and speak to this in the first instance? Thank you.
Kia ora, I understand that the members of the committee are going to speak first.
Right, thank you very much, committee. Welcome.
Kia ora, good morning everyone. E ngā iwi, ngā hapu, ngā reo, ngā mana o Tauranga Mona, me ngā mana o Te Arawa ki tai. Mihi atu mihi mai I raro I te korowai o te rangi Māori e. Ka nui te koa me te hari, nō reira kia ora mai tātou katoa. I also want to acknowledge people in the audience behind us, Tamati Coffey, Mary Dillon, and I also want to acknowledge Puhirake Ihaka, who was previously the former chair of Te Rangapu for 12 years. I also want to acknowledge the overflow that's in the next room, but they might have moved into the back. So mihi atu kia koutou to everyone. So greetings to you all. I am the independent chair of Te Rangapu Mana Whenua o Tauranga Mona, a collective of 17 iwi and hapu representatives in the Tauranga City Council area. We can only speak on behalf of the Rangapu and its support for the representation, recommendation and the establishment of a Māori ward, of which will be tabled today. The Rangapu Mana Whenua o Tauranga Mona, previously known as Tauranga Mona Tangata Whenua Collective, was established in 2002. Literally, we have been operating for 18 years as Māori representation relationships to the Tauranga City Council. There are 5 iwi runanga representatives and 12 hapu representatives. Today, we are here to advance our leadership together for Māori representation for the Tauranga City Council election 2022. This is probably my 3rd or 4th time I've actually stood in front of a council to push the Māori wards. Once at the Western Bay District Council Partnership. Te Rangapu has established a long-standing relationship with TCC and believes we have contributed to the growing infrastructures internally and externally to the growth of our city despite its challenges. Māori representation in council will provide the decision-making component. In turn, this will strengthen the Māori voice and demonstrate true partnership. This engagement can provide the leadership model in this country alongside the appointment of Māori seats in the Bay of Plenty Regional Council. If we gather such a momentum, we will be recognised in the Bay of Plenty and Western Bay as the national leaders in local government and be highly profiled amongst our colleagues throughout the country. This is an exciting opportunity to show New Zealanders how this can work, but most importantly, how we grow our city and our people. The matter of whether a Māori ward is established is of interest to the whole of Tauranga Moana Māori community. There have been formal and informal consultation undertaken by the Rangapu and debated for many years amongst our people. It has always remained a unanimous decision to advocate for a Māori ward. And there are two broad thoughts. One, the Tauranga City Councillors can, by resolution here today, agree to the establishment of a Māori ward. And two, there is a statutory obligation to provide opportunity for Māori to participate in the council's decision-making process. The establishment of a Māori ward will assist with that obligation. The matter of Māori representation is likely to be of huge interest to the whole community and is unlikely there will be a unified public view on that matter. There is likely to be positive and negative feedback generated in the media on this matter. We are just following due process. The Local Electoral Act 2001 enables councils to establish Māori wards. Wards are established by way of council resolution. However, the outcome of the council resolution can be overturned by a public demand for a poll. The statutory provisions, Part 1A of the Local Electoral Act 2001, Māori wards and Māori constituencies, set out in section 19Z to 19ZH, are racially based provisions of that legislation. Those provisions only apply to Māori wards and constituencies, and not any other types of wards or constituencies. We believe that there is support within government to remove those provisions, but may not see any action on it until after the general election. In terms of tangata whenua representation on council committees without voting right is not in the spirit of partnership described in the Treaty of Waitangi, a partnership the Local Government Act has endorsed. We encourage the Mayor and councillors to vote with an open mind and to put your personal differences to the side. We are taking an active role given the history of ongoing disparity that has resulted without effective decision-making by Māori at the table. The Bay of Plenty Times today, the Western Bay of Plenty District Council Councillor Margaret Murray-Bainge opposes her council bid to introduce Māori ward, claiming it is an issue of equality. In response to that, Māori and Aotearoa want equality to that in terms of the Treaty of Waitangi perspective. We are not coming through the back door. We are being active with due process because the Local Electoral Act says we can. Anyone can push for a ward as long as it fits within the review cycle. City Vision, I had the privilege of attending a City Vision workshop, two workshops with David Cunliffe, and they were really, really awesome workshops. And there was the health sector, the social sector, councils, tangata whenua, and people who are actually active in our community. And I'm going to call it out for what it is. Racism is ingrained in our community. We felt it during the debate of the 11 Mission Street, the museum, the occupation of the town hall where this building sits now. So historically, and also historically with Te Ranga and Pukahenahena. So I leave that with you all, and I hope you decide fairly and frankly. Kia ora tātou.
Kia ora Materia. Buddy, did you...
Yes, we have questions at the end, Mr Mayor. Kia ora rā koutou, nā mihi ki a koe e te rangatira tēnā, Tenby. Koutou ngā memo o te kaunihera, me ngā kaimahi o te kaunihera, me ngā iwi katoa, tēnā koutou. Sir, this is an important day for tangata whenua of Tauranga Moana. Today, councillors will be asked to vote on the establishment of a Māori ward within the Tauranga City Council rohe. The process is set out in today's meeting papers. We make the supporting statement on behalf of tangata whenua as members of Te Rangapu, the partnership forum between council and Tauranga tangata whenua. We trust it will be helpful to your deliberations. As you might already know, currently councils can vote to create more wards during a representation review, usually taking place once every 6 years. Those decisions can only be appealed to the local government commission. Excuse me. But for Māori wards, a different standard applies. After councils vote to create a Māori ward, 5% of voters can petition to call for a poll to be held to confirm or not the council vote. It is no secret that those poll provisions have proven to be a death blow for Māori wards proposals, with at least 5 that we know of being voted down by polls in relatively recent times. Those results come on the back of voter turnouts which averaged only 40%, as reported by Radio New Zealand. It seems clear to us that Māori wards are clearly discriminated against where a poll gives the ability to, and it's based on the previously mentioned local government election turnout, less than half of the electorate to deny Māori ward proposals. Former New Plymouth Mayor and self-confessed reformed racist Andrew Judd calls it, and with some justification, racist legislation. It is interesting that the only 2 councils in New Zealand with Māori wards are in our region. The Bay of Plenty Regional Council is one, which has had Māori wards for over a decade. The other is the Waikato Regional Council. We do not know of any failure or difficulties with the activities of those councils as a result of having Māori wards. According to the latest figures we were able to find, the Māori population of the Tauranga electorate is sitting at a little over 17%. Interestingly, that compares with a national electorate average of around 14%. We imagine that the Tauranga Māori population, characterised by its youth, has and will continue to grow at a faster rate than the rest of the community. Suffice to say that reaching 20% or 1/5 of the city's population is not too far away. On this basis, we think it entirely reasonable that Māori should have their own representation on council. Councillors, as hard as you might try, and I know some councillors do put much effort into this area, you cannot be expected to have a complete understanding of the Māori community's perspective. We are making progress in this area, and I'm talking about the addition of a tangata whenua representative to council committees, and hopefully after today with voting rights. So the creation of a Māori ward is a logical extension of that progress. In our opinion, it also means the council is better enabled to meet its Treaty of Waitangi obligations under Part 1, Section 4 of the Local Government Act. We understand that some see this whole exercise as a waste of ratepayers' funds because it will inevitably go to a poll and be defeated at an estimated cost of $200,000. Well, do not call for a poll. The decision to incur that expense lies with those who would call for the poll, not with Māori. But if you want to talk about a waste of ratepayers' money, let's have a conversation about a certain nearby half-built car park building. We believe that a change to the discriminatory provisions in the Local Electoral Act is likely post this year's general election, where we expect to see a change in the coalition government and a fresh climate where review and amendment of this section of the Act will become possible. Representation to that effect have already been made. Thank you for this opportunity. We're happy to answer any questions you might have, but can I conclude, sir, by wishing Councillor Baldock a happy birthday. I believe it's his 27th birthday today. And just to inform you, Councillor, the whole of the iwi is available for drinks after 6 o'clock.
Kia ora, buddy. I have to say, before we go on to Coral, I didn't know that. That's news. Obviously, you go back a long way. Larry, happy birthday on behalf of us all. I'm not sure if it's 74, but I'm very sure it's not 27. Coral, just for 4 questions, if we could, did you want to summarise any of that? Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. I believe Carlo is going to speak to the report, and Warwick and I are here to answer any questions that may come our way.
All right, thank you. In that case, Carlo, just one moment. Councillor Arbery.
Yeah, I do have a question. I just want to indicate as well that I'm happy to move at the appropriate time.
Thank you very much.
Do you know what the population of youth that are Maori are in Tauranga?
We'll have to ask Auntie Google. Sorry.
It's 1/3.
Thank you, Councillor Cloud.
Kia ora, Buddy and Matari and Carlo. So the question that often is brought up in this situation is, how does one Māori representative reflect the aspirations and the desires of 3 iwi? Can you please explain how that would work in a practical sense? And of course, you know, does every single decision that comes to the council table go through that process, or only the significant ones? Thanks.
As I said earlier, we can only speak on behalf of the Rangapu. I am aware that recently we have formed a subcommittee to look at all those details, just making sure that we are heading down the right track. So those conversations with iwi will be happening. So it's all about the engagement process with iwi and hapu.
You could always choose to create 3 wards, Council. Can I just, I'd just like to add, I think you're seeing it in motion at the moment, Councillor Clout. We have 2 representatives here who have held discussions with 17 iwi and hapu and who are bringing forward a collective view. And I think it's no different to each of you who are charged with garnering the vision, the aspirations of 145,000 people. Even when you're elected into a ward, you still have that obligation. And so it's about having a Māori voice around the table that you wouldn't have access to in any other time. So that's how I would respond to that.
Carlo, thank you for that answer. Do you want to speak to this report as well?
Kia ora, Tenby. Tuatahi kei te mihi atu kia kōrua, mō tō kaha hei tū I mua I a tātou tēnei rā. O te rā kia tātou katoa, te haukainga, tēnei te mihi atu kia koutou. I rātu, kua tai mai Wi-Fi, tēnei te mihi atu kia koutou. Tō kaha hei tautoko I tēnei kaupapa, tēnei rā, tēnei te mihi atu. I've just only got a few things. I think, you know, the tangata whenua have been working hard to put themselves in front of you to discuss with you all sorts of different issues. And I think it's testament to the trust and confidence that has been growing, that foot keeps being put forward. And I think what you see in tangata whenua is a genuine desire to assist with the development of Tauranga Moana, of Tauranga City. And as Matire has kindly pointed out, they continue to do that through the front door and never through the back door. What I will add is that what you see in front of you is an ongoing offer. And it's an offer that you've actually had proven in terms of the value that's been put forward at the committees. And as Buddy has rightly pointed out, we're not aware of any issues that have come up with representation. And you all actually have first-hand experience of the value that can be brought around the table by having Māori representation at your committees. The last thing I'd like to leave you with is that one of the unique things about Tauranga, and we've all got to keep our eye on Tauranga City, that's what we're actually here to look after and to advance and to grow and develop. And for Māori and for us all, whether we understand this or not, Tauranga was built on confiscation. These people are offering their support. It is off the back of that confiscation that we all have benefited. And I think the very least that we could do to reflect that history of our city is to afford them a voice at the table. Kia ora tātou.
Kia ora, buddy. Councillor Morris, followed by Councillor Granger.
Thank you, Mayor. Question through you to Carlo or Coral. First question is, how does the
Tauranga City Council Code of Conduct apply to members appointed to committees and members of the Tangata Whenua Committee?
Through you, Your Worship, I could answer that question for you. It supplies its elected member code of conduct, but we have agreements with our Tangata Whenua representatives where they agree to abide by the code.
Thank you. And second question, are you aware that Councillor Maria Ngātai was elected to the Matapihi ward, not at large in Tauranga district, because there was no at large ward back in '92?
Yes, very familiar with Auntie Maria. I guess the point that has been discussed at Rangapu meetings is it's now over 20 years since Auntie Maria was here, and it probably is symbolic of the issue that we face, is that it's a very real struggle for Māori to facilitate their voice at the table, and I don't think that those efforts will stop, but there's certainly an opportunity here to facilitate the Local Government Act intentions directly, and that's really what the tono today is about.
Kia ora, Carlo. Councillor Granger.
Yeah, thank you. Look, a question just through to the chair, to perhaps not yourselves, but to Warwick Lamp. Warwick is here somewhere. Thanks, Warwick. If we establish a Maori ward here in Tauranga, and I have a constituent out at Welcome Bay, Te Papa area, and say, for instance, Bill Granger wants to sit next election, if that constituent is on the Maori roll, have they not then got the opportunity to vote for me?
Good tatou, through you, Your Worship. The issue of the representation review, which determines the wards, is an issue that is on the table after the decision around Māori representation. And so once the Māori representation is sorted, then Council, as part of its rep review next year, has the opportunity to look at the ward structure for the general wards and for at large, or whatever the structure might be, taking into account the Māori representation that is there. So that then gives Council the option to decide a structure that gives residents, both on the general roll and on the Māori roll, the option to vote in the appropriate case. Now, it is a little bit tricky with an at-large component, for example, as is at the moment, is that Māori representation requires a Māori ward, and also then requires Council to have general wards. Now, so that's a decision for later on, once the Māori representation is in place, and at that time, then those issues are on the table as to what is the best representation to then give effect to people to have their choice in both scenarios.
Thanks very much, Warwick.
So again, what you're saying there is that possibility that that person could vote for me, even being on the Maori roll. Is that what you're saying?
That's right, depending on the structure the Council decides, and then depending on what that is and which issue you then stand for as a candidate.
Could I just add that Māori electors would vote in the Māori electors would vote in the Māori ward and in the at-large wards. Well, they're not at wards, at large.
Thank you, Coral. Councillors, other questions? Councillor Robson.
There was a bit of head shaking going on with regard to Warwick saying, and I just want to get clarity here. Currently we have a situation where we have 4 at-large councillors, and we have 3 geographic wards for which 2 councillors are elected per ward, and the mayor, of course, is elected effectively at large. If I can understand what you said, Coral, if we were to have 1 Māori ward, I think that's the most we're allowed, despite Buddy's witty repartee that 3 would be even better. I think at the moment under legislation we're allowed 1, but if we were to have 1 Māori ward, that would effectively be an at-large ward, and people on the Māori roll could effectively vote in that. could they, if that was the structure, that ward replaced one at-large councillor, but we retained the geographic wards, could someone on the Maori roll also vote for Councillor Baldock, who's a ward councillor, not an at-large councillor? That's the bit that I think we're looking for some clarity on. My understanding is they couldn't.
They can vote for at-large candidates, not for general wards. So only voters on the general roll can vote in a general ward.
So can I just supplementary? Effectively, they would effectively be voting potentially for 4 councillors and the mayor. If we had that situation where we still had 3 geographic wards, they wouldn't be able to vote for any of those 6 or 2. Other people, not on the Maori roll, would actually have effectively more influence because they could cast more votes. 2 for the ward councillor, 3 for the at-large. Is that correct?
So when you're deciding your representation review, you would take into account that there would be one Māori ward councillor, a councillor representing the Māori ward, and then you would then have a look at how you would want to shape your remaining representation. So you could, for example, have more than 10 councillors, you could have one general ward, you could have 9 councillors from at large. You could decide however you wanted to do it. Oh no, you do have to have one general ward, sorry. Under the legislation you do have to have a general ward with a Māori ward, but that general ward could be at just have one general ward. So those are decisions for later on, once you've made a decision about Māori representation.
Thank you, Carol. Councillor Hollis.
Yeah, thanks. I've got a question about who is eligible to run in a Maori ward. Is it a member of the Maori electoral roll?
Through you, Worship, yes, that's right. To stand in the Maori ward, you need to be on the Maori roll.
Mr. Baldock.
Yes, supplementary to that, when is the next opportunity for Maori to shift to the Maori electoral roll if they're not currently on it?
I'm not sure exactly what that time frame is, but I understand, I think it's 2024 that may well be the option. It is every 5 years, so I just can't recall when the last one was.
Thank you. Any other questions, councillors? Councillor Arbery.
I do actually have a presentation to go along with my motion.
I'll be seconding the motion, Your Worship.
Councillor Baldock.
Yes, I'm moving the recommendations from the subcommittee. So, Tauranga City Council has been a city council since, I think, 2003. And before that it was a district council. So I thought I'd go back and have a look at who our elected members were over the history of this city actually being a city. You might notice some trends. Oh, that's not a good photo of Catherine, sorry. Again, Catherine holding it down for the ladies. Look at that, just when you thought the population of women in Tauranga was 9%, all of a sudden it jumps to 40-odd%. And we don't need to spend very long on these folk. Now, if we look at the purpose of local government and what we're here to do, it's supposed to recognise the diversity of New Zealand communities. And it seems there's a bit of irony between the people that are elected and the diversity of our communities. So just note that dissonance there. We're also supposed to look after the cultural well-being of our communities. And under the Treaty of Waitangi, we're supposed to improve, so maintain and improve opportunities for Māori to participate in local government decision making. So, Treaty of Waitangi and those principles that we're supposed to adhere to, what's that all about? Well, New Zealand's got two peoples, right? We've got Maori, the original people of New Zealand, and then we have the Crown or the settlers. So under the Treaty of Waitangi, that is our founding document, you have the Crown, and that includes immigrants such as myself, even though I have a different ethnicity, couldn't speak English when I first arrived in New Zealand. I come under the Crown. The other people are Maori or tangata whenua, two partners. And the principles of the treaty, they're outlined quite nicely in this document here. The principles of the treaty as outlined by the courts and the Waitangi Tribunal. I just want to read a few excerpts to put all our decision making into context. So the treaty cannot be read as a contract to build a house or buy a car. It was a political agreement to forge a working relationship between two peoples and must be seen in light of the parties' objectives. One treaty partner has made it clear what their objectives are. We, elected members, we're a part of the Crown. So the same entity that signed up to that Treaty of Waitangi, that's who we represent, or that's the entity we act on behalf of. So what are our obligations under that treaty today? So in the view of the courts and the Waitangi Tribunal, treaty principles are not set in stone. They are constantly evolving as the treaty is applied to particular issues, like the one we're facing today, and new situations. Neither the courts nor the Waitangi Tribunal have produced a definitive list of treaty principles. As President Cook has said, the treaty obligations are ongoing. They will evolve from generation to generation as conditions change. So my question is, what are our obligations under the treaty to our partners here today? Is it fair that we have 11 people here elected under the Crown system or under the Western system without a formal voice for our treaty partner? Or is our obligation to put in place a formal mechanism for tangata whenua to have their voice and actually to have a vote? For those who are planning on voting against the recommendation from the subcommittee, those who want to vote down what our treaty partner has requested, I just urge you to please explain your reasoning and make it clear to everyone here why you think we don't have an obligation to establish a Māori ward.
Thank you, Yako. Really appreciate the time and effort you put into preparing and thinking about this. It's greatly appreciated. Councillor Baldock.
I'll reserve.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Morris, I think you had a question.
No, I wish to speak to it. Yeah, thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.
I think resolutions B and C are seeking to answer a couple of questions. The first question is, why is nobody of Māori parentage currently elected to Tauranga City Council? And the second question is our city prejudiced, and is that prejudice insurmountable? I think that there are people in our community that are prejudiced. Absolutely. I mean, there's no question of that. Wherever you have a group of humans, you will find prejudice, and it is wrong, and we have to fight against it. But I don't think it's insurmountable. I mean, if you look at the Tauranga general electorate, for almost my entire life, that has been represented by Winston Peters and Simon Bridges. Historically, it's actually closer to 30 years than 20 years when Councillor Maria Ngātai was elected to Tauranga, then District Council. And she was elected in 1992 to the Matapihi ward. And that is significant because in the committee report it talks about Whaia Maria being elected at large. That is not correct. Large councillors did not exist back then. And in previous reports there has been talk about increased Māori representation under an at-large scheme. I would argue that that is actually the opposite of the experience in Tauranga. Also, Councillor Matthew Dixon was elected to Tauranga District Council 1989 to 1992, and he represented the Mount Maunganui ward. Again, ward, not at large. So I guess the question I have to answer is Tauranga more prejudiced today in 2020 than it was in 1989, over 30 years ago? And I think most people would answer no. It's less prejudice than it was 30 years ago. So what's happened since 1992? Well, the geographic wards around our city have reduced in number from 5 to 3, and the number of councillors has also reduced. In 2004, the Local Government Commission then said, with a population of around 100,000 people, 10 would be the absolute minimum number of councillors to represent the community around the table. Tauranga's population is now 145 odd thousand people, so a lot more now. So what's the solution to a lack of Māori representation elected around this table? Well, in my view, the solution is to get rid of the 4 at-large seats, because remember we didn't have those 30 years ago, and to replace them with geographic ward councillors, where Maria Ngātai was elected in Matapihi and Matthew Dixon in Mount Maunganui. Also, increasing the number of councillors from 10 to 12 would reduce the salaries of the 10 currently around the table. That's not overly a bad thing in the community's view, I think. But it would also enhance democracy. And if we had 12 councillors around this table, Josh Tikani would be a councillor around this table, elected by all the people of Tauranga with a strong mandate. And so he wouldn't be able to be pigeonholed into one representative view. He would have the mandate of all the people of Tauranga. So if we get rid of the 4 at-large seats, replace them with geographic ward councillors and increase the number of councillors from 10 to 12, we do enhance democracy. We would have Māori representation around this table. We wouldn't have our carpetbagger, our lovable carpetbagger from Coromandel, but that's all right. We would have a Josh around the table. And the other thing is, we wouldn't be creating a stumbling block by making distinctions on the basis of ancestry or identity politics. So I think that is the answer moving forward for all of our community. I think we are less prejudiced than we were 30 years ago. So the reintroduction of geographic wards, increasing in number and increasing in councillors, would have the desired effect. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Morris. Councillor Hughes.
Some people argue that by having a Māori ward you are manipulating the democratic process. That currently we have a process that allows anyone to run for council and to be chosen. Let me tell you what we have though on our council currently. We have 4 people who wanted to be mayor. The reason they all now sit at this table is that in the campaign mayoral candidates get much more media attention, many more opportunities to speak, and because it's such an important role, they invest heavily in their campaigns, and others also invest in their campaigns, whether with money or with constant endorsement, lobbying, hosting of special speaking opportunities. If we had not had 4 mayors at our table, our mayoral candidates are all Pākehā, all men, all between 50 and 70 years old. And look at the current functionality of our team. What we need on a council team is diversity. We need it to debate equally around the table and represent our communities. If that is not what's happening, as Jaco's presentation clearly shows, we need to somehow ensure that it does. In my view, if someone runs for mayor, they should not also be able to run for council. If we are in partnership with Māori under the Treaty of Waitangi, we need to ensure that they are represented at the table. And in that way, we need to ensure that we have a Māori ward to ensure that that happens, because it's not happening. Thanks.
Councillor Hughes. Couldn't agree with you more. Councillor Cloud.
Thank you. Just two questions, if I may. I assume we can take them in parts, the voting of those?
So I think we
Thank
will
you.
take these in parts if that's the council's wish.
Yep, thank you. And another question for Warwick. We've been given, through you, Mr Chair, we've been given the cost of $216,000 for a poll, specifically for the issue of Māori wards. Can you please tell us what the cost would be, or the additional cost, if that poll was held in conjunction with the next local government election? So the incremental cost, you might say. An estimate will be fine.
Sure. So you're saying that instead of having a separate poll, that the Māori ward resolution be added to the next election?
Correct.
The cost of that is there's a little bit of cost in vote processing, but there's an extra cost for an extra piece of paper to for the information sheet around that particular vote. So the cost of that is roughly 20 cents per voter pack, plus a little bit of vote processing. So grand scheme of things, $20,000 to $25,000.
Thank you very much. So in speaking to the resolutions, first of all, look, I absolutely advocate the voting rights for the tangata whenua representatives on our committee. I think the representatives add a lot of value around the table, and I really appreciate their input. And so it seems perhaps unfair for them to be able to have a say but not actually have a vote. And so I'll certainly be supporting Resolution B. When it comes to C, when it comes to the issue of Māori wards, my big concern there is, and I have a lot of sympathy for having a Māori ward, although you could argue that it might be seen as tokenism, one person representing all of the tangata whenua and mana whenua of our city. So that's a concern that I have. But another concern is that if we do pass this Māori ward today around this table, there is every likelihood that there will be a poll requested, and then of course it will have to be undertaken at some considerable cost, $216,000. So at this point I'll be voting against the establishment of a Māori ward, but if it does fail, I would like to foreshadow a new C, which entails a poll at the next local government election in 2022, because I think we really need to nail this with the wider electorate, and at which time also I think it would be very important to have a very full and comprehensive debate on the arguments for and against a Māori ward, because we have not really, in this report, we have got no view on that. There's been no analysis on the pros and the cons, and I think the wider community needs to have that discussion in quite a robust way. And so if this does fail, if C fails, I'll be putting up a new C. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clout. Deputy Mayor Salisbury.
Speaking to the voting rights, I think the calibre of the mana whenua reps on our standing committees is very high. And I think their contribution is incredibly valuable, and I see great benefit and representation not only for tangata whenua but all the residents of Tauranga in approving voting rights. And speaking to creating a Māori ward, I would say ko te wā in Naianei. It is time. It is the right thing for us to do right now. We have mana whenua reps on our subcommittees, but not on our main council committee. We have the opportunity before us today to acknowledge the historic and ongoing contribution and partnership of Māori on behalf of tangata whenua and all residents of Tauranga, to give them the mandate to sit and vote around the decision-making table. I think if we just take it purely as a percentage, we've heard today that there's just a little over 17% Māori in Tauranga, and one seat around this table only represents 9%. So I will be voting for this motion.
Kia ora, Tina. Dawn.
Thank you very much. First of all, I do write my own speeches, so if my use of language, my lingo, or a mispronunciation of anything, it is certainly not my intention, and I would really enjoy the fact that you could come to me personally to ask me to clarify any of the statements that I am here to make today. I would like to thank very much my friends and whānau at the local Mount Maunganui hapu, Ngāi Tukarangi and Ngāti Kuku. I would like to thank them very much for your advice, your opinions and your help in the past few days. I would like to thank my mentors for talking to me last night around the region up until midnight, and Dr. Wayne Beelby this morning for a very long extended period of time, expressing also his views and opinions and his compassion for where I'm sitting here today. As far as B, voting rights, I really appreciate Mara Whenua and obviously Tangata Whenua reps on our committees. It is essential. These reps have been mandated by their local hapu, and it's an honour for all of us to be sitting collectively, decision-making, at the table, with open minds, open hearts, so that we can also be looking at a collaborative approach. I think our voting rights together are necessary, and it is the right thing to do by us all. As far as the ward representation, I love the idea of Māori wards. But if I am to be completely honest, from a democratic, pragmatic and realistic point of view, if we pass this, my concern is it will go to a referendum and it will not be successful. I do like the idea of it I do like the idea that it could be done at the next election. I really am so passionate and would love to spend my time, my energy and my resources supporting our local hapu and iwi in community-led collaborative initiatives. We are looking at a cultural heritage trail at the moment. We're looking at highlighting Māori cultural sites of significance. We're looking at supporting our local economy through this, and education, not only to our youth, but to our entire population, okay, regarding our initiatives to work together in partnership and collaboration. New Zealanders, both Māori and Pākehā, we are all amazing. We all live in a beautiful country and we are one. I am passionate about looking at our partnerships together and looking at these exciting projects that any of you are welcome to come and talk to us about, especially what we are trying to achieve regarding our cultural centres, regarding our cultural heritage trails. That is where I'd like to be putting our resources into at this particular point in time. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillors, anyone else want to speak? Councillor Hollis.
Yeah, thank you. There was a time about a generation or so ago when the folks sitting around this table got things done in this city, when our city could run within its means and had very little debt, and it even had Maori councillors. The change over those last decades may well be due to an increasing progressivism, and progressivism is what has ground this city and its ratepayers down. What our city needs is smart, deliberate and thoughtful growth. In our city, every 3 years, there is an opportunity for any member to pay $200 and run for council. The chance to meet the whole community and to encourage the city to vote them onto council. And this is called democracy. With a Maori population approaching 20% and a youth population of a third, as we've heard today, it seems likely that should a candidate run a reasonable campaign, then a Maori ward would be unnecessary. Please also remember that each elected member swears an oath to consider the best interests of all members of this city. This oath has no caveats or exceptions and demands that we act faithfully and impartially. The idea that this group of 11 people elected by the city does not have the empathy or the impartiality to consider the needs and wants of all members of our city, regardless of their gender, their age, levels of disability, whether they own a dog, or their race, is quite frankly insulting. A decision based on one single attribute, an attribute based entirely on the luck of the draw to be born to a certain set of parents, and then because of that, to be given the ability to represent that group without the whole city deciding on that representation is the opposite of democracy. To specifically allow Maori wards or even have selected tangata whenua members on committees at all, let alone having voting rights, is virtue signalling and gives weight to the idea that these 11 folk around this table do not have the empathy to listen to, consider, and impartially act on the needs and requests of tangata whenua. In fact, it goes one step further and is, in itself, divisive.
Thank you. Carlo, did you wish to comment?
Just a couple of comments. I would challenge the councillors to have a good look at Māori statistics in all facets, in all areas, in all parts of the city, and tell us how good a job you do with that without a Māori voice here to advocate on behalf of that. So I just want to make that point, because what you are hearing from tangata whenua is an offer of a hand of support. We are all frustrated by the decline of Māori in this city.
Kia ora, Carlo. Thank you very much. Councillors, does anybody else wish to speak to this before we put it to the vote? Councillor Granger. We will take it in parts.
To make a comment on B. As regards to B, to me, I will not be supporting that recommendation. And the reason why is simply this: it's not my right to allow the Maori people to come on board and vote. It's not my right to do that. It's the right of the community. The right of the community, not me. And I think that's why I will not support B. Just to make that clear.
Thank you very much. Councillor Robson, did you wish to speak?
Yes, and I thank you, Your Worship, for the invitation. I assume Larry hasn't started the clock, someone will. Look, it's a difficult topic, and my first observation would be, is the quality of the report before us lacks significant exploration of the issue, the options available, all practicable options as required under the Local Government Act, the consequences, the risks, and that's unfortunate, because Councillor Morris has already identified other ways that we could certainly improve representation in this city. And look, the evidence is clear that in so many ways councils do not reflect the diversity of this community. Up and down the country, this is not an issue unique to Tauranga. I'm concerned that there is a risk that we will make a decision by majority here that will result in a poll. The evidence favours my estimate that that risk will happen. Yeah. The results of that poll will be that a Maori ward is rejected. In that debate, people will adopt positions and views of people and say things that they will find enormously hard to retract. My experience of the city in a recent debate around 11 Mission Street is that when I used the word kaupapa, the shout came, "Use your own language. It's a matter of public record." My position on 11 Mission Street was one that promises needed to be kept, and I was in favour of the CMS buying 11 Mission Street off TCC, thereby effectively reimbursing the ratepayers to whom I believe a promise had been made, and then quite happily gifting it, gifting it to those with mana whenua, and they in turn could gift or peppercorn lease it to the Elms. But unfortunately, what should have been to me an elegant solution, where the responsibility for the situation was properly allocated, and those who created the situation so long ago, if you like, rectified it, was denied because we didn't really explore the topic. This topic here requires proper explanation. This report does not support the proper exploration of the topic. I have voted in favour of tangata whenua representation on our committees. I believe our Takawainga unit makes an amazing contribution to the understanding of issues that this council faces on a regular basis. I have spent more time in the company of Carlo Ellis than any other manager in this city. We have dined and talked and explored, and I have learned an enormous amount. It's been his gift to me. But what I see in front of me is a report and recommendations poorly thought out, poorly thought through. Answers to certain questions have been at best confusing. It's unfortunate. This topic deserves better than this report and the lack of debate, the lack of community engagement that I see here today. My position, hopefully, is clear. I stood on community engagement. I stood on quality information. At the moment, we have neither. My position will be to say no to what's proposed. And I'm happy to foreshadow an amendment, a supplementary motion, an additional motion, should this one fail.
Thank you, Councillor Robson. Before I pass over to Councillor Baldock, for me, and I just wanted to thank Councillor Arbery again for his presentation on this. I also wanted to thank Councillor Morris on his, I thought, very useful and practical suggestion around the disestablishment of the at-large seats and the establishment of a greater number of ward seats. I think as time may evolve, that will, I think, be a very practical way of approaching it. Perhaps time will tell. But it is really, in my mind, all about leadership and kotahitanga, and just addressing immediately Councillor Hollis's comment about getting things done, and the fact that a progressive, the progressive society of Tauranga, if we can call it that, doesn't get things done. I will tell you a story about the fixing of the Maui base track that I probably haven't told. And it is very simply this, that Marty and I went and visited iwi, the owners of the monga, and it was done 10 weeks later for, as we now know, 13% of the price set, and some, 3 years of debate. So I'm not sure that being progressive negates getting things done, because things were done expediently at a very high quality of project management, and at 13% of the price. So I think we just need to put that in context. Had it not been that Marty and I went and visited the owners of the monga, I suspect we might still be sitting here today with a broken track. Who would know? The point, I think, that it was really well raised by a number of people is that with 20% of the population effectively, in my view, unrepresented of Tauranga Moana, certainly it will be 20% at some stage, it would concern me greatly that there isn't a voice for our mana whenua here at Council. I absolutely reject the comment that this is a backdoor process. It's public. We're discussing it very openly. There's TV cameras on, and we are having a debate about it, and I think a very public setting, and as indeed it should be. The issue of equality intrigues me a lot. Because if we look at equality of iwi in this country, which brings me back to leadership and kotahitanga, the system's failing. And the system has failed Māori for a long, long time. And while we are here at a local government level, the system has failed Māori, in my view, at a national level, and we only have to look at our prisons, employment, wages and salaries, education and health. And, you know, I think here at a local level there is an opportunity to become more inclusive and to create a greater level of equality with mana whenua as part of the council decision-making processes. And I hope at some stage that will happen. So I will be supporting this, and I appreciate that there is a very diverse level of thinking around the table, which is a good thing. But I do think at the end of the day, it is about leadership and kotahitanga, and I think Tauranga City Council councillors has an opportunity here today to lead New Zealand, and I would commend that we do so today. Councillor Bulldog.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I too thank Jaco for his initial comments. I look forward to his right of reply. I've also been really appreciative of Carlo, Buddy and Materi's eloquent speeches today. It is a taste of what we could have around the table all the time if we voted for the motions in front of us. I want to say kia ora Tamati, recognised Member of Parliament with us. I have only met you a few times, but I remember with affection the Naya Mahuta, who I sat with on the Select Committee when we passed the Local Government Act. And I do hope, like others, that after this election, perhaps the government may fix this problem. Because I know we debated it in the Select Committee, and some of us and I represented United Future on this committee, that this was going to be the outcome, that 18 years later we've not seen the great progress we hoped for when we made it very clear that we needed to improve decision-making for Māori, and that really the best is that they sit at the table as equals with us. No matter how they are elected to the table, that they sit there to bring that voice to us. So I will certainly support this, and I think the first step, which I'm very happy about, which may pass today, is at least we give voting rights to those who sit with us on our committees. And I want to ask my colleagues, how many of you would accept a position to sit for... These committees have had tangata whenua representation for, I think, nearly 5 years now. How many of you would do that if you didn't have voting rights? Yet they have patiently come and contributed without that privilege. And I am always amazed, I'm always ashamed, really, when I look and see the patience and grace and long-suffering of tangata whenua in our country as they pursue what was promised to them in the Treaty of Waitangi. So I'm glad we'll have those committees, those representatives on those committees with voting rights. It may help us make better decisions. But there is the main committee, the council that we sit at today, that still lacks that voice, and I would fully support the establishing of a Māori ward. It is true that it has difficulty getting through what is probably inevitably a referendum that will be used. I'm saddened that some would just look at the cost of that as a reason for not voting for it. What is the cost of not having a Māori voice at council? Please consider that. And all I can say, and I'm not going to make a long speech today, but all I can say is the only way we get to a better future is that we do the right thing today. Councillor Clout, I implore you, do the right thing today. Don't try and think about the right thing at 2022 at the next election, for very little will change. Do it today, and who knows what tomorrow might bring. Yes, we're all nervous about the results of a referendum. We've seen all the other cities that have tried to do it. But who knows that we couldn't be different here, that we couldn't see a rising up of people, the younger people particularly in our community, to get out and vote for a referendum to make a difference, so that we would see
a Maori voice at our council table. I urge you, please, to support all of these recommendations today. Make your voice count for the sake of those whose voice is very seldom counting at our council table. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Bullock. Councillor Avery, thank you.
So I did just want to address a few points that were made around the table. So Councillor Robson, community engagement. Let's vote this thing through and send it to a poll. And then you have good community engagement because everyone has a vote in that poll. In terms of the cost of that, again, Councillor Clout, I just urge you to think about what the right thing to do is here. If you contrast that cost to some other costs that we're imposing on the ratepayers, like a code of conduct complaint and a second code of conduct complaint sent through on Sunday, the cost of independent code of conduct hearings, and then independent reviewers and observers, that is a poor use of ratepayers' money. The cost for 200 grand for this referendum is a good use to have the conversation, expose the underbelly of racism, particularly the casual racism that's rife in our city. We have casual racism in the councillors' lounge as well. It's not just out there. One thing that was a word that was used when we were talking about removing an avocado tree and a development was, this is an atrocity. Just like to put that in context, right? So early land purchases, the government set up a commission to consider land purchases, and they decided if the commissioners concluded that a purchase was made in good faith, they could validate it and award a grant limited to 2,560 acres. If the purchase was fraudulent or invalid or exceeded that size, the excess land in question was not returned to the original Maori owners, but became Crown land. Our history is rife with atrocities, right? That treaty was breached multiple times. So taking a small step towards correcting that, and this isn't a step to or take affirmative action. This is just equality. So giving the two peoples of New Zealand both a seat at the voting table. Some other points. The poll and the referendum, the pain and the debate that causes, that pain's not on us, and it's not our right to make a call on that pain. That's for tangata whenua, because they have to face that backlash of racism. And if they've said, hey, we're willing to have this poll, have the debate with community, and have the conversation, then we should respect that. On the CMS, or the Church Missionary Society, making fraudulent purchases making poor decisions with the land or immoral decisions, ultimately the Crown has delegation over everything. So the Crown could have investigated that and declared those purchases illegal at the time. So ultimately we, as the Crown, have responsibility. The buck stops with us, not with someone out there. We can't pass the blame. Again, Councillor Granger, the community having the right to make this decision. If that's the case, then we should vote it through and let the community decide with a poll. That's the fairest way of doing it. So you should vote yes. Some other things. So our non-progressive society currently, or in the past, allowed things to happen like have a marae with people living there and then an industrial zoning put right next to it. If we'd had Maori representation at the table, maybe they would have put in place a buffer zone between the residents there and the industrial zone. Ultimately, I hope that we will align with central government, who've taken the step to put in place Maori representation. And if we don't, I hope that central government takes this out of our hands because I don't think this group is making good decisions on this topic. In terms of, I'll finish with this. So the community can be broadly described in a few different ways. So A group describes the community as being, you can have a community of interest, a community of place, or a community of identity. I think we have the first two covered fairly well. We have people who love trees and people who like chainsaws. We've got people from every different ward covering the different places of our city. But when it comes to community of identity, we have two people group, two partners to the founding document of our country, and only one partner is represented here. There's only one identity under that document represented at this table. So please, I'm begging you, change your mind and vote this through.
Kia ora, Yako. Council, I will put this to you in parts, and the first one is that we receive the report Māori representation. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Abstentions? One abstention, Councillor Robson, thank you, and carried. B, and I won't read it all, but it is the approval of the recommendation to tangata whenua to have voting rights. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Can I just see a show of hands, please? 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Against? 1, 2, 3. That is carried. And C, approves the recommendation of tangata whenua Tauranga City Council Committee to establish the Māori ward for Tauranga City Council. All those in favour, and hands up please. Please say aye.
Aye.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And against? 1, 2, 3, 4, and an abstention. 1. It is carried. Sorry. Folks, we will have a lunch break. Adjourned by my watch, it's 20 past 12. 1 o'clock, is that okay? Great, thanks everybody. Adjourned till 1.